Rainy alone at night. The clock struck midnight as Sarah sat curled up in her armchair, sipping on a mug of lukewarm coffee. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows of her small, isolated cottage. Each raindrop sounded like a tiny fist pounding to be let inside. The air inside felt still, almost too still, and despite the warmth from the fireplace, Sarah couldn't shake off the chill crawling up her spine. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, a much-needed retreat from her job, the city, and the noise that seemed to never stop. But the isolation of this remote cabin was starting to feel less like a reprieve and more like a cage. The storm had rolled in much earlier than forecasted. It had begun with soft, rhythmic drumming on the roof, a sound Sarah had found comforting at first. But as the hours passed, the rain grew heavier, angrier, and the wind started howling like some wounded animal. The sound wasn't just outside anymore. It seemed to seep into the walls, rattling her nerves. She looked out the window, but all she could see was a thick veil of rain illuminated by flashes of lightning. The forest that surrounded the cabin was swallowed by darkness. With no neighbors for miles and no phone signal, Sarah's only connection to the outside world was her laptop and the fading Wi-Fi connection. She had been halfway through a horror movie marathon when the internet died, leaving her alone with the storm and her thoughts. Suddenly, there was a sound. A thump. Sarah froze, the mug halfway to her lips. The noise had come from the back door, a solid thud like someone or something had thrown itself against the wood. She listened closely, heart pounding, but the sound didn't repeat. Just the rain, just the wind. Her rational mind told her it was probably a branch from a nearby tree, heavy from the rain, that had smacked into the side of the house. But the part of her that had just been watching ghost stories wasn't so sure. She stood up, the floor creaking beneath her feet, and walked cautiously to the back door. The wooden floorboards groaned in protest with each step. The dim light from the kitchen barely cut through the darkness as she reached the door and slowly turned the lock, pulling it open just a crack. Nothing. She opened the door wider and peered out. The wind blew rain into her face, but there was nothing on the porch or in the yard. She squinted, trying to see through the downpour. Her breath caught when she noticed something on the ground just beyond the porch, an indistinct shape, small but unnatural against the wet grass. $1? A strange feeling of unease slithered up her neck. How had that gotten there? Hesitant, Sarah stepped out into the rain, ignoring the chill as water soaked through her pajamas. She crouched down to get a better look at the object. It wasn't a doll. It was a bundle of old, wet cloth, tied together with twine. It almost looked like some kind of crude, makeshift charm or totem, like something someone might leave as a warning. Or a curse. She felt a surge of panic. Someone had been here. Sarah shot a glance around the yard, her eyes searching the dark woods that surrounded the house. No movement. No signs of anyone. Without thinking, she grabbed the strange bundle and hurried back inside, slamming the door behind her and locking it. Her hands trembled as she threw the wet cloth into the fireplace, watching as the flames eagerly licked at the fabric, turning it into ash. A shiver ran down her spine as the wind outside picked up, and a low moaning sound filled the air, louder and more mournful than before. It almost sounded like a voice, whispering through the trees. She told herself she was being ridiculous. It was just a storm. The wind was playing tricks on her, but as she stood by the fireplace, trying to shake off the anxiety tightening her chest, a new sound emerged from the kitchen. A scraping noise. Sarah's breath hitched. Slowly she turned toward the kitchen door. The sound was unmistakable, like something being dragged across the floor. Her mind raced through possibilities. An animal? Had something gotten inside while she was distracted by the storm? Gripping the poker from the fireplace, Sarah cautiously moved toward the kitchen, her heart thudding in her ears. The rain hammered harder against the house, as if the storm itself was warning her not to go any further. She paused at the kitchen door, pressing her ear against the wood. The scraping had stopped. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the hinges squeaking in protest. The kitchen was empty. Her eyes darted from corner to corner, her grip on the poker tightening. The door to the pantry was ajar, just slightly. She could have sworn it had been closed earlier. She approached it slowly, her bare feet sticking to the cold tile floor. Her breath quickened as she reached out with a shaking hand to swing the pantry door fully open. Nothing. No animals. No intruders. Just shelves lined with cans and jars. But something felt wrong. The air inside the pantry was heavy, stagnant, and it carried a strange smell, earthy and metallic, like wet soil mixed with copper. She took a step back, feeling lightheaded. Her mind raced. Was she imagining things? Then she saw it. A faint glimmer of movement from the corner of her eye. She spun around, the poker raised, but nothing was there. The kitchen was empty. She stood frozen for a moment, trying to make sense of it when the lights flickered and with a loud pop, the house went completely dark. The storm outside roared even louder, the wind now screaming like a wild beast, rattling the windows and shaking the roof. Sarah's breathing became shallow, her chest tight with fear. She fumbled for her phone in the dark, the dim glow of the screen barely illuminating her surroundings. No signal. Her mind reeled. There was no way to call for help, no one to come to her rescue. Suddenly, the scraping noise returned. Louder this time. Closer. It was coming from the living room. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she backed away from the kitchen, her heart hammering in her chest. She felt a presence, something heavy and cold, lurking just beyond the doorway. The living room was pitch black, but as she stepped toward it, a flash of lightning lit up the room for a split second. And in that brief moment, she saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly thin, standing in the corner of the room. Sarah gasped, dropping the poker. The figure didn't move, but she could feel its eyes on her, watching, waiting. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The figure seemed to shift, elongating, its limbs stretching unnaturally as it stepped toward her. Another flash of lightning, and it vanished. Sarah stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug as the figure reappeared, this time closer. She could hear it breathing now, a raspy, wet sound that sent a jolt of terror through her. She backed up until she hit the wall, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the door. It was too late. The figure loomed over her, its face hidden in shadow. A cold, unnatural presence wrapped around her like a shroud. She felt her breath hitch as its long, bony fingers reached out, brushing her skin with a touch so cold it burned. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, the hum of electricity filling the air. The figure was gone, as if it had never been there at all. But Sarah knew better. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin, a deeper darkness had taken root. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second a reminder that she was no longer alone. Sarah sank to the floor, her body trembling, as the weight of the truth settled in her chest. Something had come for her tonight, something ancient and patient, lurking in the shadows just beyond the reach of the light. And it wasn't finished yet. The rain continued to fall, a steady, relentless beat against the windows, as Sarah realized with a cold certainty that the storm was only the beginning.